What inspired me to do it was because of the incidents that happened at Subway the 2 previous weekends before. When we talked to some of the workers who were on shift that night, what they had said was that there was a white student there who became very angry with the staff when he was in line. He began to yell racial slurs, and there were other students there who were his friends or like somehow associated with him, and they also started to flip over tables and chairs, and it just got so out of hand that the police department had to be called. So Wake Forest University Police Department was called, and when they came there, the police just had everybody disperse. They didn't really take down anybody's name. They didn't arrest anybody. And then the university issued a response that was just kind of like, this happened, but we're doing all these other good things. And for a lot of students, especially minority students on campus, it just felt like it was another attempt by the university to sort of sweep an incident like this under the rug. So after 2 weeks of basically no response from the university at what steps they've taken, after the university had failed to reach out to even those workers who were working that night, we felt as if we needed to take it into our own hands. And so we were at a BSA meeting, a Black Student Alliance meeting, when one student brought up that we should do a picket line and we should block Subway. And so I was like, I'm up for that. Like, I did community organizing the last 2 years. I've dealt with a number of protests. So we thought, sounds like a good idea, let's do it and see if we can get a response from the administration that's more than just that little letter that we get from Penny Rue.
And did you get that response you were wanting?
No. So we, in what we believe, so they actually haven't in any way responded to any of us. What we do believe are implicit responses is there was one email that was sent by Penny Rue, I believe, earlier this week, where she talked about the new website that they're having, that community building website, where they have a number of proposals that many of the people who I organize with had proposed. The website, though, is, if you've looked at it, there's not very much content on it. It was what it was promised to us to be is that there would be all the demands that were up there, and there'd be a timeline for all of the demands and the feasibility of all of them. None of that's up there. It's just very general statements about the committees. And then same thing, her rhetoric in the email, we also found to be very problematic because she really wanted to downplay how much of an isolated incident this was, how it wasn't connected to larger campus climate issues. And if anybody's familiar with what's been happening, at least over the last few years at campus, they would know that this is connected to other problems that we've been having, especially dealing with racial tension on campus. So we felt it was a very lackluster response, and we still have not received an actual response from her. I agree. I think that it needs to be more of a human connection. I think that when we're asking ourselves, how do we connect to one another as humans? People who are similar, right, in that way. We really have to begin with the question of how are we different? And how have our differences shaped our experiences on campus? And so I think that this goes along with what we were saying before. So one of my roles during the protest was actually inviting students, particularly white students, to join us. I was trying to be, hey, why don't you join us? Like, this happened, why don't you join us? And there were, and the only students who actually joined us were minority students. There were no white students who came and joined us. There were students who were white who were already present, but none of them who we personally invited, just off the quad, like, come here. They didn't feel like that it was an urgent enough situation. They might not have known about it. They might have had somewhere to go. You know what I mean? But that's why when it comes to these types of issues, especially the issues that we have been dealing with on campus, it is uncomfortable to say, but they have been largely shaped by white and non-white. So when we look at what a lot of these students are sort of, the bigger context of what a lot of people are thinking about is, so one example is like the barn policies versus like the IFC and like lounges that are around like the center of campus. So like those fraternity parties are not policed in the same way that the barn is policed, for example, because of a bunch of like institutional things. Same thing with, this is what I was telling y'all earlier about the town hall meeting that was hosted last spring, where there was data that was read aloud by the university police department that if you're a black student, that you're about 7 to 8 times more likely to have a field stop to be asked for an ID than if you're a white student. And so just, yeah, to kind of get at that, like, I'm a big believer that I think it is about coming together as a community. But I think it's about coming together by first acknowledging how our differences will shape our experiences on campus, and how many things that will happen to Black students will just never happen to white students. And so that's kind of what we get at when we're talking about privilege. It's not to say like people like didn't work for what they have, do you know what I mean? But it's just that because of the way that they look, or because of the community that they grew up in, or because of the community that they exist on at Wake Forest, that those experiences, like field stops from a police officer asking you, are you supposed to be here? Like, are you a student here? Will, by and large, not happen to white students. Same thing with, they're a lot less likely to have their party spaces to be policed in the same way that they're policed in the barn. Same thing with people just assuming that you're here because of affirmative action, or because they think that you're on a scholarship, they think that you're an athlete. These are things that just don't happen. So I agree, I think it is about the human connection, but I think the human connection begins with how we're all different here, and not how we're all the same. Because I think when we begin with the conversation about how we're all the same, how we just need to create unity, right, we gloss over that entire conversation about why people are mad in the first place. Do you know what I mean? So it's a more uncomfortable conversation, but I think that's where the most amount of growth happens.
During the protests, there were chants of Black Lives Matter, Wake Forest Lives Matter. With that, do you feel unsafe on campus?
That's an interesting question. I think I feel unsafe sometimes, but not so unsafe other times. But I don't know, I kind of feel like, yeah, the sense of safety I feel like is more illusory than anything else. I think I feel a little bit more unsafe, I'll be honest, because of the police on campus than I do other students. But I do know that there's many of the people who we organize with who have who've received death threats. They've received death threats anonymously on Yik Yak. They've received, so like one of our people who's really prominent in organizing, she actually had her name and address posted on Yik Yak, and people saying like, you deserve to be assaulted like Mike Brown assaulted Darren Wilson. So like stuff like that. We've had people monkey called on the quad, so people who are like really deeply involved, people like making monkey noises at them, people having lit cigarettes flicked at them, people having racial slurs yelled at them, and so I do sometimes feel unsafe on campus, but what I will say is, although I am a minority student, although I'm Filipino American, I'm not a Black student on campus, which I think is the big difference. I think that I have, and this goes along with the privilege conversation, being light-skinned and being a minority student, I have a lot of privileges that's associated with that. Like, I'm not automatically marked when I go into a space, right? People know who I am, and people look at me and but like, it's very much different than being Black. So so personally, I sometimes don't feel unsafe, but I also wonder the same thing for like my Black counterparts who are doing the same organizing work that I am. I think they're a lot more likely to be targeted for those like more aggressive forms of discrimination than I am. I think that it involves Hispanics and Asians and Black folk, and I think that the way it affects those different communities is very different. So we don't have like an enormous Latino population here, but I would imagine that if we had a bigger one, then we might see a lot of this like sort of the bigger stereotypes that are sort of that revolve around those, especially Asian groups and like Black groups, right? So I feel like there's a lot of stereotypes that are associated with the Black students on campus. There's a lot of stereotypes that are associated with the Asian students on campus, especially like calling like Babcock Bangkok, you know what I mean, like that type of thing. But I think that the way that it affects them is different. So I think for Latinos and Asian students, I think the biggest problem is, and speaking as an Asian student, I think the biggest problem is like invisibility. I think that there's just not accommodating sort of institutional resources or campus resources for those groups like there are for other groups. And so I think that a lot of the time, especially the international students, they feel like they all have to just like be in their own community. They feel like they all have to be like with one another because they don't feel like there's enough resources on campus for them to reach out to the wider campus body. And I think that there's a perception also that they're just not able to speak English or they can't communicate as well, which I think creates a bigger division between students because people feel like they can't even go and talk to the international students. Well, I think with Black students, I think there's different stereotypes. I think that those stereotypes are more have to do with like criminality. I think a lot of those ones more have to do with like laziness, so being associated with being an athlete or being on, you know, affirmative action when you're here. So I think that there are those problems with discrimination that are systemic and widespread, but I believe that they affect different minority communities differently. And so I could only see what it would be like if we had the same Latino population here that we did as the Asian population. Like, what would people be saying then? Do you know what I mean?
Do you feel a system like Yik Yak is negatively affecting how the whole campus conversation and the climate?
I think that Yik Yak does cause more tension because it's visible. But I guess I think I differ from a lot of people where a lot of people are like, if we didn't have Yik Yak, we wouldn't have so many problems. I think that Yik Yak just makes visible the problems that were already there, because it's not like those problems are, like those sentiments don't just exist on the internet. Like those sentiments will exist on the upper quad, right? And that's why I think I differ from a lot of people in that regard, that I just think that Yik Yak demonstrates what was already there in the first place. But I think that that's what causes more tension, is that like Yik Yak reveals the sentiments that exist on campus. And so that's, people say, well, if it's anonymous, then these are things that people wouldn't say in real life, right? But I think that that's kind of the point, is that it shows what people will say when they feel like they can be brutally honest about the campus that they exist on, when they feel like that there's no repercussions, that they're being anonymous, right? When they feel like that's the state they're in, what do they say? And that's why I think it creates tension, but I think that tension was just hidden, and I think Yik Yak just reveals it. When I first got here, I was excited to be here, like college. I'm from, so the area I'm from actually, it's this neighborhood called Hilliard in Eastern Washington. It has the highest rates of poverty per capita in the state of Washington. So my experience at Wake is just like this enormous culture shock. Like, I've never seen these types of folks here. I've never seen the type of money that goes around here. It's just completely different. So when I first got here, I was like, this place is kind of strange. But I'm just happy to be here. So like, I understand that some bad things happen, but bad things happen everywhere, and no campus is perfect, and everything like that. So I think I resigned myself to a lot of the rhetoric of inevitability. Like, I can't do anything about this, and I'm lucky to be here, so I might as well just be happy. I think that when the time I got involved the most was, there was this, or the first time I got involved was there was a student government election last year where the student government secretary, the night before the election, had a series of compromising pictures that were circulating of him. So there was, one of the pictures was of him when he was imitating a physically or mentally disabled person in a wheelchair. He was had his arm crooked, like posture, like really stereotypical posture, sitting in a wheelchair pretending to drool on himself. And there was another photo from his Instagram that said stuff like #Aryans, like #perfect, like Aryans don't use filters, a bunch of stuff. And so I brought that up, and that kind of was, and then I started talking with administrators, and I felt like, oh, well, I can really do make a change on this campus, like if you're vocal about those types of issues. And I think that I've just begun to grow like more and more pessimistic with how the administration handles these types of issues, which is why I felt like I've begun to be a lot more vocal, especially the last 2 years. So I wasn't always vocal, but I had a series of experiences on campus which made me feel like I had to be vocal.
Would you say you being a poli-sci major had an influence in this?
Oh yeah, definitely, because I think it's encouraged me to look at everything politically. It's encouraged me to look at how everything is sort of shaped and informed by power on campus. It showed me that the things that happen to us are not just things that happen in a vacuum, that they're deeply related to the way that the administration and the institution is run, and the way that all students sort of view themselves as citizens of Wake Forest campus. So yeah, definitely.
What needs to change on this campus to make everything a lot better than what it is now?
I mean, that's a huge question. Yeah. I think the way that it begins, and I think this goes, I think this is more realistic for just the administration than it is the wider student body. But I think that the biggest thing is that we need to have, or like foster, a culture of self-reflexivity. And sort of what I mean by that is willing to be skeptical of oneself and being skeptical of a lot of the views that we have. And so I think that that's why a lot of folks, when we're saying chants like Black Lives Matter, we're saying workers' lives matter, we're saying no justice, no peace, or when we're saying stuff like racism is rampant, when we're saying that racism exists on the campus, I feel like a lot of students, especially white students, feel like they're being attacked. Do you know what I mean? They feel like, oh, well, you're just, mad at me because I'm white. And I think that more what we're getting at is we're saying that there's a long history and legacy in this country of white folk especially creating institutions that will privilege other white people. And that's nobody's fault who's on this campus now, right? When someone gets really mad at you and says that you don't get it, there's often the impetus to be like, well, what's the deal with that person? Why are they so angry? Why are they so uppity? You're never gonna get anyone on your side if you're always acting like that, right? But there's another way to look at it being like, what has been wrong about the way that I've been learning about the world? What's wrong about the way I've been socialized into the world that has made it so I don't even understand why they're so angry? Do you know what I mean? So instead of being like, why are they so angry? Be like, how are things so bad that they are justified in being this angry? And I think that if you get to that point, then you reach that greater level of human understanding. But that begins, of course, with looking at differences between people and not how we're similar.